George, a curious little monkey. Here he comes, as happy as can be. Curious George, a curious little monkey. Why is he curious? Well, let's go and see.
Curious George and the Lost Letter. "I need your help outside, George," said the man with the yellow hat. "We have to rake up the leaves before the wind blows them away." George and his friend worked hard until all the leaves were in neat piles on the lawn. "I want to buy some trash bags to put the leaves in," said the man. "Why don't you stay outside while I'm gone, but don't get into trouble?" George went over to Mrs. Silverman's house to see what she was doing. She was raking leaves into piles, too. After a while, she stopped and put her rake up against the side of the house. When she had gone inside, George looked at the piles of leaves. Something seemed to be moving in one of them. What was it? He jumped in. Yow! Out jumped Mrs. Silverman's yellow cat. George chased the cat from leaf pile to leaf pile to leaf pile. Leaves scattered everywhere. Just then, Mrs. Silverman came out of her house. "Who did that?" she shouted. "It's taken me all afternoon to get these leaves from my lawn, and that yard's a mess again." George was scared. He buried himself deep in one leaf pile. But all of a sudden, a strong wind blew off the top leaves, and there was George. "You ought to rake my whole yard," shouted Mrs. Silverman as she tried to catch him. But George ran away as fast as he could. Uh-oh, he didn't look where he was going. The mailman was coming up the pathway with his big pouch filled with letters. Crash! The mailman tripped, and all the letters tumbled out of the bag. Some landed on the lawn, some landed in the bushes, and some even landed on the roof of the house. "George," cried the mailman, "now look what you've done. Come help me pick up the letters. You have 4 hands. You can do it faster than anyone." George scooped up the letters. Then he climbed up a tree, jumped down the roof, and got all the letters except for one. Just as he tried to grab it, the wind blew it away. "George," shouted the mailman, "you must get that letter. I've never lost one yet, and I don't want to now." George tried again, but the wind blew the letter off the edge of the roof into the neighbor's garden, and it landed on top of another tree. Quickly, George leaped down, jumped onto the bird bath, climbed up the tree, and picked it up. "Thank you, George," said the mailman. "Why, this is Mrs. Silverman's check. It only comes once a month. How good that we found it." Just then, the man with the yellow hat came over, followed by Mrs. Silverman. "There you are," she shouted angrily. "Come back and clean up my yard." "Wait a minute," said the mailman. "George found your letter." "Well," said Mrs. Silverman, "I guess I can't be angry with you any longer. I really needed that check." "Now that you've finished here, George," said the man with the yellow hat, "you can come help me clean up our yard." And that's just what George did.